Alright guys, so this week, as we've been doing a little bit of science last week, we're going to do a lot of science this week. We're going to go over things like the phases of the moon, which we unfortunately didn't get to do in our observation journals because of the moonrise. Does anybody remember what moonrise is? Takis?
It's when and the moon is always there, but we can't see it because the light and like moonrise is when the sun goes down and the moon comes up.
Yep, exactly. Exactly, yep. The moon's always there, and the moon's always there at night, and I think a lot of people, me included, thought, okay, this won't be a problem because you could always see the moon, but the moonrise is when the moon is visible, when you can see it from different times or different places on the earth, and unfortunately, as we learned, the moonrise for Indiana this past week and the week before was about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. I don't think any of you guys want to wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and go take pictures of the moon. Do you? All right. We'll have Michaela next time do some moon pictures for us. But we're gonna go off of that. We're gonna learn about the phases of the moon. We're gonna learn about the planets and how the Earth moves around the sun and what the sun does and all of that this week. I thought it might be fun if we bring that out of just science and we do other things. So one of the things we're going to be doing this week is writing our own science fiction stories. Okay. This goes together with a lot of what you guys have been doing, so when we brainstorm in a few minutes, you guys might have some really good ideas. Last week, obviously, we were doing the astronaut story, interview with the astronaut for reading, and you guys were thinking of questions that you'd ask an astronaut. Obviously, you probably learned some about going to the moon there. You watched Apollo 13. This story that we're doing this week is Journey to the Center of the Earth. So again, it's about science, it's about the Earth. Obviously, some good ideas there. Also, now that we're done with Animal Farm, the story that we're going to be reading for our read aloud is called The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which is a science fiction story. Okay. So the reason that we're going to have a number of days to write our own science fiction stories is because you might get new ideas every day. As we're going over the moon, as we read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, as we talk about this more and more, you might get new ideas. Okay. So we're going to be going over that. We'll have all week to write the science fiction story. I'm curious, I'm sure you guys know this, but I'm curious to see who can best describe it. Who knows the difference between fiction and nonfiction in literature? Michaela, what's the difference between fiction and nonfiction?
Nonfiction is real facts. Fiction is just, things that aren't real. Okay. So fiction stuff that's not real, some nonfiction stuff that is real. So if we're talking about science fiction as opposed to science fact, what do you think the difference is there? Science fiction and science fact. Remember, what do you think?
Science fiction is probably science that is not real, and science nonfiction is science that is real.
Yep. Science nonfiction or science fact are things that are real. Things in science that are real. I bet you guys can probably, if I say, what's an example of a science fact? Any science fact. Mason.
That Apollo 11 was the first space shuttle that went on the moon.
There you go. Great example. That's a science fact. Apollo 11 was the first space shuttle in 1969 that went on the moon. So if you guys wrote me a story about Apollo 11, and it involved Neil Armstrong, and it involved all of the things that you guys might have learned if you had an astronaut involved with Apollo 11 last week, that would be a story about science fact, because you'd be writing me a nonfiction story about Apollo 11. You guys saw Apollo 13? The movie, right?
Yeah.
Most of that is science fact. Obviously, Tom Hanks wasn't really on the space shuttle, but most of it was based in science fact, not science fiction. What do you think an example of science fiction would be then? If science fact are things like this was the first moon mission and these kinds of things, things that really happened. What do you think? Make up something that's science fiction. What do you guys think? Anybody else want to take a stab at it? Anything science fiction, anything. Marcos, I think you'll get a good one here.
Like you make a time machine and go back in time, and or go to the future, 2006, 60.
Exactly. Great example, Marcos. All right, so have any of you actually ever been in a time machine? Have you ever seen anybody in a time machine? Have you ever heard a story about a real time machine? No. Not real. Doesn't mean that it can't be real someday. We'll talk about that, but it means it's not real. So Marcos said, I'm going to write a story maybe about going in a time machine to the year 2060. That's science fiction. Now, you can have stories, and this is what we're going to do with science fact and science fiction. Because a lot of science fiction stories about time machines and things have science fact in them. You might have a story about outer space that's based in science fiction. It's not real. It's about aliens and interspace galactic wars and those kinds of things. But maybe they use some science fact in it. They talk about phases of the moon, or they talk about the Earth going around the sun, or they talk about the Apollo 11, mission to the moon as part of the story. So those are science facts in a science fiction story. Have you guys ever read like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, or have you guys ever read Journey to the Center of the Earth, which we'll be talking about? Any of those? No? Okay. I didn't think you did, but those are stories that were written about 100 years ago. 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea is a great example. This was written 100 years ago, and no one was ever able to travel under the ocean. Okay, so all these things that you see on like the Discovery Channel, Animal Planet. I don't know if you guys have ever seen the ones about going in little submarine crafts under the ocean to look at the fish that live on the bottom of the ocean. Any of you guys? Raise your hand if you've ever seen. Mason, some of you guys? Okay. You couldn't do that 100 years ago. There was no such thing. The technology wasn't there. And so there was a book written called 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Totally science fiction about people who went 20,000 leagues under the sea, which is miles and miles under the sea, and talking about all the sea creatures they saw. You can do that now. You can't, I don't know if there's really 20,000 leagues, but you can go miles and miles under the sea. So sometimes when you write a book about science fiction, maybe Marcos writes about a time machine, and all of a sudden in 100 years they invent a time machine. All of a sudden that becomes science fact. So that's one of the cool things about writing science fiction, is you can think about different things that maybe you'd really like to be fact one day, okay? What are some other examples of science fact? Science fact. Marcos, what do you think?
I don't know.
Anybody else? Brooke, what do you think? An example of any science fact. Any science fact that you've learned all year in science. Okay. Let's see, Amani.
Water cycles.
Okay, water cycles, there's a science fact. That doesn't have to do with outer space, but that's a good science fact. Takis, what do you think? What's another science fact?
There is more planets there's more planets than just the Earth.
More planets than just the Earth, so there are actually 8 planets now, because they've decided that Pluto is not a planet. Tevin, what do you think?
The sun is a star.
The sun's a star.
Mr. Cummins, please come to the front office. Mr. Cummins, please come to the front office. Thank you.
All examples of science fact. I want a few more examples of science fiction, just to make sure you guys really get the difference. I know you got it, Marcus. Mason, what do you think?
Teleportation.
Huh?
Teleportation.
Teleportation is a great example of science fiction. You can't just say, like if Zach says, I think this weekend I want to be in Florida. He needs to buy a plane ticket. He can't just like, Star Trek beam me up. He disappears. All of a sudden appears in Disney World. That'd be cool though, right?
Yeah.
Rahul, what do you think? Science fiction. Huh? Invisibility. You can't just turn invisible. That's a great example of science fiction. You can't just all of a sudden zap yourself and become invisible. Michaela.
Body in space without a helmet.
Flying what?
Body in space without a helmet.
Fighting in space without a helmet. Fighting in space anyway, but without a helmet, that would not go well. You've seen astronaut suits. You guys saw Apollo 13. Obviously, one of the big things is gotta have a helmet because there's oxygen connected. As you probably saw, they all have these big oxygen things on them. Because otherwise, no air in space. You very quickly not be able to breathe. All right. Now, guys, hold on. Those were very good ideas. We're going to keep this going, but the reason you have 2 pieces of paper, okay? One of them is to start your stories. We're not going to start them today. We're going to start them tomorrow. But the other one...
Mr. Cummings, please come to the front desk. Mr. Cummings, please come to the front desk. Thank you.
The other one is for brainstorming ideas, okay? We're not going to put something big up here because some of you guys might decide you want to go to another room to write your stories or be in groups where you're turned a certain way, you can't see the board. So, as we talk about brainstorming, I want you guys to take notes to get ideas for your science fiction story, okay? You do not have to turn in your brainstorming paper. These are just ideas. You can write down words that come to your mind. You can write down words that we talk about here, but ideas for your science fiction story. Basically, this is what I'm going to ask you to do. You're going to write a science fiction story. It's got to be at least a back and a front of a piece of paper, because otherwise it's not very long of a story. It could be much longer. If you guys have enough time and you really get creative and get going, it could be 5 pages, it could be 10 pages, I don't care. But it's got to be at least the front and the back. I want you to include in your story at least 5 science facts, okay? So it's a science fiction story, but at least 5 science facts. And at the end of your story, I want you to basically draw a line and put the word science facts, and I want you to list what your 5 science facts were in your science fiction story.